She was not supposed to be there. That was the first thought that crossed every mind in the room. Servants frozen mid-step, guests locked in place, crystal glasses arrested halfway to parted lips, when the great oak doors of Ashby Hall swung open without warning. The fire in the grand hearth popped. The chandelier above swayed almost imperceptibly, as if the house itself had flinched. Victoria Ashby stood at the head of the long signing table, with her gloved fingers already curled around the Duke's pen. The marriage contract lay spread open before her, heavy cream paper stamped with the Blackwood seal, waiting for just one more signature to transfer the Duke's fortune, his estates, and his name into her possession. 5 years of scheming had arrived at this single, perfect moment. Victoria smiled, and then the room stopped breathing. She came through the doors not like a woman who had escaped. She came through like someone who had been given a key. No rush, no trembling, no rags or hollow eyes or matted hair. None of the ruin Victoria had imagined every time she dared to think about what had become of her older sister. Evangeline Ashby walked in wearing sapphire blue. The gown was deep and rich, lace-trimmed and perfectly fitted, the kind that whispered of old money and quiet authority. Her dark hair was arranged in an elegant updo, every pin deliberate, every curl a choice. She was composed in a way that reached past dignity. It was the composure of someone who had rehearsed this moment 10,000 times in the dark and decided, at last, to enjoy it. She crossed the room without looking at her mother, without looking at Victoria, without looking at any of the pale faces that watched her pass. She looked only at the chair at the center of the table. She sat down in it, and she reached across the polished mahogany and lifted the pen directly from her sister's hand. Victoria's mouth opened. No sound came out. Evangeline set the pen down in front of herself. She folded her hands over the contract, not signing it, not tearing it, just covering it, like it was hers to decide. She finally looked up. "Good afternoon," she said. "I believe there has been a misunderstanding about who belongs at this table." The room did not recover. The room would never fully recover. And the story of how she got there and what she brought back with her begins 5 years before this afternoon, on the last night that Evangeline Ashby was ever naive enough to trust her own family. Subscribe to see how this unfolds. Comment below and tell me where you are watching from. I will love to say hello to you, just to know how far our story is going. No one in that room moved for the space of 4 full heartbeats. Then Lady Cordelia Ashby, their mother, made a sound. Not a word, not a name, just a small, fractured exhale, like a woman whose worst fear had just walked through the door, wearing her eldest daughter's face. Victoria recovered first. She always did. That was the thing about Victoria. She could fall from any height and land on her feet, rearranging her expression before her shoes touched the ground. She laughed. It was a short, brittle sound, like a porcelain cup dropped on marble. "What a remarkable resemblance," Victoria said, turning to the guests with the practiced ease of a woman accustomed to performing. "This is what grief does to a mind. You begin seeing the loss in every stranger's face." But the guests were not looking at Victoria anymore. Evangeline did not rush to correct her. She sat perfectly still, with her hands flat against the contract, and she let the silence do the work. She had learned, in 5 years of surviving places where silence was the only weapon available, exactly how much damage it could cause. It was Duke Alistair Vance who moved first. He had been standing near the far wall with his 3 young sons. The boys always kept near him in unfamiliar company, and she felt, rather than see, the moment he recognized her. It was not a shock that moved across his face. It was something quieter than that, and more devastating, something that lived between relief and fury. He stepped forward. "Evangeline," he said it the way a man says a word he has been forbidden to say for years, and has finally been given permission. Victoria's composure cracked just a fraction, just enough for the eyes of the woman who knew her best to see it. "She is not Evangeline," Victoria said sharply. "Evangeline is gone. She chose to leave. Everyone in this room knows the account of what happened." Evangeline tilted her head. When she finally spoke, her voice was low and perfectly measured, carrying the warmth of a blade kept just inside its sheath. Everyone in this room knows the account you gave them, Victoria. That is not quite the same thing. She reached beside her and drew a leather folio from the seat of the chair she had placed there herself, before anyone arrived, through a servant she had recruited the night before. She opened it on the table in front of her, sliding the first document to the center, where all eyes could follow. It was a ledger, a real one, signed and witnessed, detailing every debt the Ashby family had accumulated over the past 5 years, debts owed not to banks or moneylenders, but to the woman sitting calmly at the head of their own table. The Ashby estate, Evangeline said, her finger moving down the page, the Ashby townhouse in the city, the Ashby wool contracts, and the Ashby family line of credit with Brennan and Sons, all of it currently held against a debt of £432,000. She paused. Owed to me. The room went a different kind of still. The sharp, calculating still of people suddenly doing arithmetic in their heads. Victoria stood rigid. Her mother had pressed both hands to her mouth. The guests near the windows had drawn slightly together without realizing it, instinctively separating themselves from the Ashby name. This is absurd, Victoria managed. This is theatre. A desperate woman's theatre. You may contest any figure in that ledger, Evangeline replied. I have the corresponding receipts for each transaction, including the ones your intermediary, Mr. Harwick, processed on your behalf. He was very cooperative when I explained the alternative. Victoria's eyes went to the door, just once, just a flicker. Evangeline saw it. She always sees everything now, she thought. That is what they made me into, a woman who misses nothing. She closed the folio. The contract on this table will not be signed today, Evangeline said simply. Not by the Duke, not by anyone. And I would suggest, before anyone in this room takes another step, that they consider very carefully whose interests they are standing beside. Alistair had not moved from where he stopped. His 3 sons watched Evangeline with wide, serious eyes. The youngest had actually leaned forward, balanced on the edge of his chair, transfixed. She noted it, and felt, against her will, something warm pressed against the inside of her ribs. She did not let it show. She stood from the chair. She smoothed the front of her gown. I will be staying in the East Guest Suite, she said to her mother. The one that used to be mine. I trust you remember which room that is. Lady Cordelia did not answer. She simply stared at her eldest daughter with the expression of a woman watching an accounting of her sins take human form and pull out a chair. Evangeline walked to the door. She had taken 3 steps before she turned back. Welcome home, Victoria, she said softly. I have been very much looking forward to seeing you again. She left the room. Behind her, she heard the faint sound of her sister's composure, finally breaking. Subscribe to see how this unfolds, and comment below to let me know where you are watching from. I would love to say hello to you and know just how far our story is reaching. She had been happy. That was the part that would always feel the most unfair, not that she had suffered, but that the suffering had been carved directly out of something that had been whole and bright and real. Evangeline Ashby had been happy. The afternoon the Duke's letter arrived, she had been in the garden cutting back the white roses her father had planted the year before he died. Her gloves were dirty. There was a small scratch on her right wrist from a thorn she had not seen in time. The sun was behind the clouds, and the air smelled like rain on dry stone. The footman came on a jog. She read the letter standing up, still holding the garden shears in one hand. It is my hope and intention, if the arrangement is agreeable to your family, to open a formal courtship. I have admired your character for some time, and would consider it an honor. She read it twice. Then she sat on the garden wall and read it a 3rd time. Alistair Vance, Duke of Blackwood. She had met him at the Hartley winter gathering twice, briefly, across crowded rooms, and she had thought him severe, and then thought him clever, and then thought about him more than she should have, for a man she had spoken to for perhaps 40 minutes combined. She had gone inside glowing. The glow lasted exactly until she walked through the sitting room door. and saw Victoria's face. Her sister sat very still in the high-backed chair near the window, a teacup balanced in her hands, her eyes fixed on nothing. She was 4 years younger than Evangeline, and she was beautiful in the way that cold things are beautiful, pristine, hard-edged, designed to be admired at a distance. Victoria had been trying to attract the Duke's attention since the previous autumn. Evangeline understood in an instant. She tucked the letter carefully into her pocket and said nothing about it at dinner. But Victoria had already been told by the footman. Their mother had already seen the seal. In the following weeks, the Duke called. He and Evangeline walked the grounds. He spoke carefully and listened more than he talked, which she had not expected. He asked about her opinions on things, not performances of opinions, but actual ones. She gave them to me. He pushed back on 2 of them and agreed with the others, and she found herself looking forward to the next meeting with an eagerness she kept deliberately quiet. He brought his sons for the 4th time. The boys were shy and uncertain, watching her from a careful distance, and she did not push them. She crouched to the youngest's height and asked about the small carved horse he was holding. He told her its name was Captain. She said it was a very proper name for a horse. He smiled at a small, crooked thing and did not move away from her for the rest of the afternoon. She is the one, Alistair had told himself that evening, watching her with his children from across the garden. She is the one. He made his intentions formal the following week. The engagement was announced. Victoria stopped speaking to her. Their mother tried to smooth it over. When Victoria would come around, she said, "You know how she gets," and Evangeline tried to believe her. She even went to Victoria's room that night and knocked. "I know it is difficult," Evangeline said when the door opened. "I know you cared for him." "I am sorry." Victoria looked at her with an expression Evangeline could not name at the time. She knows it now. She has had 5 years to name it. "No, you're not," Victoria said pleasantly. "But you will be." She closed the door. 3 nights before the formal contract signing, there was a small family celebration. Nothing grand, just the immediate household, a few close friends, some good wine. Evangeline drank 1 glass of the burgundy her mother pressed into her hand and thought it tasted faintly of something she could not place. She remembered the taste of the glass. She remembered laughing at something the Hartley cousin said. She remembered nothing after that. She woke in the dark. The floor beneath her was stone, cold, damp stone. Her wrists were bound with rope, and her cheek was pressed against the ground, and her gown, the pale gold one, was torn at the shoulder. She did not scream. Even then, even at the very first moment, some buried instinct told her that screaming would only tell whoever put her here exactly how frightened she was. She lay still, and she listened. There were voices somewhere above. 2 men, speaking low and quick about a schedule, about a payment already made, about making sure the girl was calm for the morning transfer. There was a third voice, softer, more deliberate, and it was that voice, heard through the crack of a wooden door above her head, that told her everything. "She is strong-willed. Do not let that fool you into underestimating the dosage next time." It was Victoria's voice. Evangeline pressed her mouth against the cold stone floor and made no sound at all. "Do not let them hear you cry," she told herself. "Do not let them know they have broken anything. Because you are not broken. You are not broken yet." And she had not been. But the girl who lay on that stone floor, the one still wearing the gold celebration gown, the one whose sister's voice was the last thing she had trusted, that girl did not survive the night. Something else rose up in her place. Something that remembered everything and forgave nothing. They called it the Hollow. That was not its official name. It had no official name, because officially it did not exist. But the people inside called it the Hollow because of the way sound moved through its stone corridors, swallowed whole, leaving nothing behind. It was a workhouse in the body of an old asylum, repurposed by men whose names appeared nowhere near it, but whose money built every lock. The women brought here were sorted by what they could do with their hands, sewing, laundering, bookkeeping, and set to work producing labor for contracts that circled back to the same names in the same ledgers that the same powerful men pretended not to know about. Evangeline arrived in February. She left in December, 5 years later. In between, she became someone that the February girl would not have recognized, and the December woman had no regrets about. The first 2 months were the worst. Not because of the work was exhausting, but survivable. Because of the silence, because of the absence of any information about the outside world, about Alistair, about whether anyone was looking for her. She existed in a complete vacuum, and she spent those first weeks filling it with 2 things: grief and arithmetic. The grief was for herself, and she allowed it exactly as much space as it needed, and no more. Crying in a place like the Hollow was something you did once, privately, and then set aside the way you set aside anything that could get you hurt. The arithmetic was different. The arithmetic was survival. She had noticed within her first week that the warden, a man named Doyle, thick-necked and confident in the way only unchallenged men are kept his account books in a locked cupboard he did not always remember to lock. She had noticed that the woman who managed the books, an exhausted clerk named Marta, made a small but compounding error in the quarterly summaries that would eventually draw attention from the men above Doyle. Evangeline said nothing about the error. She filed it the way she filed everything useful, carefully, in the back of her mind, behind a door that did not open unless she needed it. By the 3rd month, she had arranged to do additional bookkeeping work in exchange for slightly better quarters. Not comfortable. Nothing here was comfortable, but quieter. By the 6th month, she was managing the bulk of the accounts. By the end of the first year, Doyle trusted her completely, in the specific, careless way that men like Doyle trust people they have decided are not a threat. He made the mistake of thinking that because I was here against my will, I was without will, she thought once, watching him sign off on documents without reading them. That is the particular blindness of men who have only ever seen the world from above. By year 2, Evangeline knew the names of every man whose money flowed through the Hollow. She knew their amounts, their schedules, their particular vulnerabilities, which ones kept mistresses, which ones were in debt themselves, which ones had signed documents that could ruin them if they ever saw daylight. She began quietly helping the women around her. Not visibly, nothing visible, nothing that would draw notice. A word about which shifts to request. A suggestion about which guards could be reasoned with and which could not. A way to communicate through the laundry system that the women used to pass small notes, then larger information, then, eventually, plans. By year 3, she had made contact with the outside. There was a supply merchant who came monthly, a young man whose sister had disappeared through the same network years before, and who had been looking for a way to burn it down ever since. His name was Edmund. She never told him her name. She was careful about that, careful about everything, but she started giving him documents to carry out. Names, figures, proof. By year 4, she had amassed enough evidence to dismantle the entire operation. She had also done something else, quietly, through a series of proxies Edmund arranged. She had purchased the Hollow. Not destroy it, purchased it, because destroying it would scatter the evidence. Destroying it would free the men whose names were in those ledgers. Destroying it would be satisfying for exactly 1 afternoon, and Evangeline had learned to plan further ahead than 1 afternoon. She kept the Hollow running. She replaced Doyle with a woman from within the institution, a former accountant named Agnes who had survived longer there than anyone, and whose sense of fairness was as rigid as the walls around her. The work continued, but the profits went to different places now. The women were paid. The locks that could be opened were opened. The ones that could not were noted and tracked, and would be opened later. By year 5, she was ready. She had 3 things she had not had when she arrived: evidence, power, and patience. She had 1 thing she had not expected: a purpose that reached past revenge. Revenge is a reason to leave, she had told Agnes the night before she walked out. But it cannot be the only thing waiting for you on the other side. You have to build something too. Otherwise you are only destroying, and destroying is just grief wearing better clothes. Agnes had looked at her for a long moment. "What are you building?" Agnes asked. Evangeline had pulled on her sapphire blue gown, bought 3 weeks prior, chosen with deliberate care, and looked at herself in the small mirror propped against the wall. "Accountability," she said, "and a life." She walked out through the front door of the Hollow at 8 in the morning on a Tuesday in November into the cold grey light and did not look back. She had planned to avoid him. That had been the strategy: clear, clinical, professionally reasonable. Deal with the family first. Expose the network, dismantle the Ashby financial house of cards, present her evidence to the relevant authorities, and remove herself to a property she had purchased quietly in the countryside, where she could breathe and sleep and begin to resemble something like a person again. The Duke was a complication she had not fully accounted for, not because of what he represented: power, witness, the man whose family name had triggered the entire chain of events, but because of what she could not stop herself from feeling when she saw him standing in the corridor of Blackwood Manor the morning after her return. She had gone to the manor to collect a document she had left in the hands of Alistair's personal solicitor during the careful legal maneuvers of the previous month. She had not expected the Duke himself to be in that corridor. She had given him every possible signal that she wished to handle their interactions through formal channels until the family matter was resolved. He was standing at the window at the end of the hall when she turned the corner. He was looking out at the winter garden with his hands behind his back, and he looked, for a moment, like a man who had been waiting there for years and was only just beginning to wonder if the wait had been worthwhile. He turned when he heard her footsteps. They stood 8 feet apart, and neither moved. The last time they had been in the same room, she was 23 years old and wearing pale gold, and he was sitting across from her father, agreeing to formal terms, and there had been a moment, just one, when their eyes met across the table, and something passed between them that neither of them had been given the chance to name. She had thought about that moment exactly once in 5 years, because once was all she could afford. "I did not think you would come to the manor yourself," he said. His voice was controlled and careful, but she had spent 5 years learning to read the things that careful voices were built to conceal. "I did not plan to," she said. "The solicitor was unavailable, and the document could not wait." Of course, a pause, the kind that had weight to it. "Evangeline," he said her name again, the same way he had said it in that room full of witnesses, like permission finally granted. "I need you to know something." "Alistair," she said it deliberately, watching him absorb the sound of his own name from her mouth after 5 years. "Whatever you need to tell me, I ask that you—" "I knew you had not run," he said. She stopped. "Within the first week, I knew," he continued. "You did not take a single thing. Not a letter, not a coat, not a coin from the household fund. You left the way. Only people who do not choose to leave with nothing. And the story Victoria told had 3 inconsistencies I documented and gave to my solicitor within the first month." She was quiet for a moment. Then, "Why did you not?" "Because I could not find you." The words came out with a force she had not expected from a man so accustomed to composure. "I hired 4 different inquiry agents over 5 years. I had 2 of them dismissed when I discovered they were feeding information back to the network. I traced the operation to 2 different cities before I lost the thread again. I was close, Evangeline. I was very close. And then you walked back through a door I had spent 5 years trying to open from the outside." She looked at him for a long time. "Do not decide anything now," she told herself. "You are still raw. You are standing in the corridor of the house where he lives with his children, and you are raw and tired, and you have not had one uncomplicated feeling in 5 years." But then she thought about his sons, the 3 dark-haired boys she had seen in that room the day before, watching her, with eyes that were half frightened and half fascinated. The youngest, who had leaned forward in his chair. "Your sons," she said. "They look well." Something shifted in his face. "They have asked about you," he said quietly. "The youngest, Oliver, still has the carved horse. He told me last year that he would like to give it to the lady in blue someday, if she ever came back." She pressed her lips together, and looked at the floor for one very controlled moment. "I am not ready," she said finally, "for any conversation beyond this one. I need you to understand that. The family must be addressed first. All of it. Every piece of it. And then I would like to begin again," he said simply. "If you will allow it." She looked at him. He looked at her. The winter light came through the window and touched the side of his face, and she thought, against every wall she had built over 5 years, that she had missed him. Not the idea of him actually being him. The specific, careful, quietly furious man standing in this corridor. "Ask me again when it is finished," she said. She walked past him and collected her document and left the manor. She did not look back, but she was already counting the days until it would be finished. The East Guest Suite of Ashby Hall had not been touched in 5 years. The linens smelled of a closed room. The writing desk was dusty. Someone had removed the small framed painting of the coast that had hung above the fireplace and replaced it with nothing, just a pale rectangle on the wallpaper where the sun had not reached. Evangeline stood in the center of the room on the first night and made a mental list of everything she needed to change, and then she made a different list, everything she intended to use. The house was her territory now, in every legal sense. The debts she held gave her effective control of every financial decision the family made. They could not sell, could not lease, could not borrow, without her signature or her say. She had not yet chosen to enforce this publicly. The signing room had been enough for one day, enough to make the walls of the house shift slightly on their foundation, but it was there, waiting. She began, quietly, to replace the household staff, not loudly, not all at once. A new kitchen maid here, a new footman there, each one vetted carefully, drawn from the network of women and men she had built during her years in the Hollow, people who owed her nothing except the option to trust her, and who had chosen to anyway. By the end of the first week, she had 11 of her own people positioned throughout the house in roles that gave them access to every corridor, every conversation, and every meal. Victoria noticed. Of course she noticed. She appeared at Evangeline's door on the 4th evening, which was sooner than Evangeline had expected, and exactly as composed as she had anticipated. "You cannot simply replace our people," Victoria said from the doorway, making no move to enter. That itself was interesting. Victoria had always walked into rooms as though she owned them. "I have already done it," Evangeline replied. She was at the writing desk, working through a document without looking up. "The ones I've let go have been given fair severance from funds the estate actually has, which is more than you were planning to do when the debts became public. This is our home. This is my collateral," Evangeline said pleasantly. "There is a difference." She looked up then. Victoria stood very still in the doorway, her mauve gown immaculate, her chin at the angle she used when she was performing Serenity. "She is frightened," Evangeline thought. "She has been frightened since the moment I sat down at that table." "Good. Let her be frightened. Let her understand what it feels like to live in a house where you are not sure whether the ground beneath your feet belongs to you." 17. "What do you want?" Victoria asked. Her voice was very quiet. "Everything you took from me," Evangeline said, "and everything you built with it." Victoria left without another word. Evangeline returned to her document. She did not sleep much those first weeks, but not from fear. She slept in short, deliberate intervals, the way she had taught herself in the Hollow 4 hours, fully alert when she woke, immediately oriented to the room and its position and its exits. It was a habit she suspected would take years to undo. She spent the early morning hours going through the family's financial records, which her own agents had begun quietly compiling. The picture they revealed was worse than even her contacts had suggested. Victoria, in an attempt to sustain the family's appearance of wealth, while secretly driving away every suitor she judged a lesser match than the Duke, had borrowed aggressively against the estate. Every time a creditor had grown nervous, she had managed to quiet them with promises of the coming Blackwood alliance. The Blackwood alliance that had never come, because the Duke had refused to sign with a woman who could not answer a single question about his sons without deflecting to the family's financial assets. She never understood him, Evangeline thought, reading through the ledger in the pre-dawn quiet. She thought he wanted what every titled man wants: wealth married to beauty, prestige married to prestige. She did not understand that he was looking for something else entirely. She remembered Oliver's carved horse. She pressed on. By the end of the second week, she had moved 2 of her agents into positions close enough to Victoria to monitor her movements and communications. She had identified 3 of Victoria's allies among the household people whose loyalty had been purchased rather than earned, and had given them each a quiet, private reason to reconsider. She did not threaten. She never threatened. She simply presented facts in the kind of careful, even voice that made people understand she was not asking. The house was rearranging itself around Victoria, like water finding a new level. And Victoria, who had spent 5 years building a position entirely on the scaffolding of a lie, was beginning to feel the scaffolding shift. The dinner was Victoria's idea, which meant it was a trap. Evangeline had known it was a trap from the moment her mother relayed the invitation. Would Evangeline join the family for a private dinner, an intimate gathering, no guests, just the 3 of them, for the sake of civility? She accepted immediately. She was not the prey in this trap. She had simply decided to walk inside it and redecorate. The dining room of Ashby Hall was set with the good silver, which struck Evangeline as either genuinely civilized or deeply ironic, given the context. The cook had prepared 4 courses. The wine was already poured. Their mother sat at the foot of the table with the expression she wore whenever she had decided to pretend the room around her was not on fire. Victoria sat to the right, luminous in pale cream, with her hair dressed high and her diamond earrings catching the candlelight. She smiled when Evangeline entered and gestured to the chair across from her. "Sister," she said warmly, "I am so glad you came. I would not have missed it," Evangeline said, sitting down. The soup arrived. They spoke of neutral things: the weather, a recent auction of a neighboring property, a book their mother had supposedly been reading for 3 months. Evangeline was pleasant and unhurried, and watched the table. She saw it during the second course. One of the new footmen, a young man named Gerald who had been with the house since before she left, and whom she had correctly identified as Victoria's man, leaned slightly as he set down the wine refill for Evangeline's glass. Just slightly. Not enough for most people to notice. But she had spent years noticing things most people did not. "She has done something to my glass," Evangeline thought without alarm. Of course she has. She could not frighten me out. She could not buy me out. So now she tries again the method that worked 5 years ago, because people who are truly desperate always return to their first successful move. She waited. She let the conversation drift into the third course. She listened to her mother ask careful, meandering questions about where Evangeline had been all these years, fishing for a version of events that could be managed, and she gave pleasant, general answers that contained nothing useful. Then, during a moment when both Victoria and Lady Cordelia were focused on the far end of the table, she made a small, practiced movement and switched the glasses. She had done it so many times in the hollow redirecting drinks, meals, documents, that it required almost no thought. The muscle memory lived in her hands now, smooth and automatic. She picked up Victoria's original glass and drank from it. Water. She watched Victoria pick up Evangeline's glass, now her own original, and drink from it. It took 12 minutes. The first sign was Victoria going very still, the way the body goes still when it receives a message it was not expecting. Then a faint flush across her cheeks. Then her hand on the edge of the table, gripping. "Victoria?" their mother said, noticing. "Are you quite—" Victoria stood up too fast. Her chair scraped back. Her face was deeply flushed now, and her eyes had gone glassy, and she was pressing one hand to her sternum, with an expression of total, uncomprehending alarm. Evangeline stood calmly and came to her side. She put a steadying hand on Victoria's arm. She looked directly into her sister's panicked eyes. "I believe you need some air," Evangeline said softly. "Shall I send it to Gerald? He seems to be the footman most familiar with tonight's arrangements." Victoria stared at her. "You," she started. You are going to be fine, Evangeline continued quietly, steering her toward a chair. The dosage was mild. I know, because I measured it before you had the kitchen. Add it to my glass. Victoria made a sound, not quite a word. You have confirmed something useful for me tonight, Evangeline said, still in that same gentle, even voice. I did not need the confirmation, I already had enough. But courts appreciate a pattern. 3 attempts tends to read very clearly to a jury. She stepped back. She looked at her mother, who had gone the color of old wax. I suggest someone help Victoria to her room, Evangeline said, and perhaps dismiss Gerald for the evening. He looks uncomfortable. She sat back down and finished her dinner. She did not enjoy it the way a crueler person might have, but she did not pretend to feel sorry either. She had been brought up to believe that honesty was a virtue, and she saw no reason to be dishonest with herself about the fact that sitting at the table of the house she had lost, watching the woman who had taken everything from her experience, 10 minutes of the fear that had defined 5 of Evangeline's years, she felt something that she could only describe as justified. Not peace, not yet, but a step toward it. Lady Cordelia Ashby came to Evangeline's room at 7:30 in the morning, 4 days after the dinner. She knocked. That was the first thing she knocked, instead of entering, which was something she had never done when Evangeline lived here before. It told Evangeline a great deal about how much had shifted in the architecture of power inside these walls. "Come in," Evangeline said. Her mother entered wearing her dark morning dress, her silver hair already pinned neatly, her face arranged in the expression she used for difficult conversations, composed, careful, slightly mournful, designed to inspire sympathy. Evangeline had learned to read that expression at a very young age. She set down her pen. She waited. "I know you are angry with me," her mother began. There is no appropriate response to that, Evangeline thought, so she said nothing. "I want you to know that I did not know what Victoria intended to do that night. Not the specifics. I want you to believe that." "What did you know?" Evangeline asked. Her mother was quiet for a long moment. "I knew she was planning something," Lady Cordelia said finally. She was so distressed. She had been so distressed for weeks. I thought I told myself it would be something smaller. That she would cause a scene, perhaps. Make a claim to the Duke about your suitability. I did not. You did not ask, Evangeline said. You chose not to ask, because asking would have meant knowing, and knowing would have meant acting, and you have never been someone who acts when the alternative is available. The words were not cruel. They were simply true, and both women knew it. Her mother pressed her hands together in her lap, a small, tight gesture. I am asking you to consider the family name. Whatever you do, whatever you have planned, the name will be destroyed. The boys will be destroyed. I have grandchildren in this house, Evangeline. There are children who will suffer. There are no children in this house, Evangeline said quietly. I checked before I returned. Her mother blinked. Victoria is not married, Evangeline continued. She has not been married. The Duke refused her a third time last month, in writing, which is in my possession. The only children I have thought about in the context of this family are the Duke's sons, and they are not your grandchildren, and they were never going to be. She opened the folio on her desk and slid a document across to her mother. This is an accounting, Evangeline said, of every lie the family told to society in the 5 years of my absence. Who was paid to corroborate them? Which members of the Ashby network benefited from my disappearance? Which solicitors processed documents in my name without my knowledge or consent? Every name is in there, with corresponding evidence. Her mother looked at the document and did not pick it up. I am not going to beg you, Lady Cordelia said softly. I know you well enough to know that would accomplish nothing. Then do not beg me, Evangeline said. Tell me the truth instead. You have not done that since I came back. Not once. Tell me something true. Her mother was silent for a very long time. I was relieved, she said at last, so quietly that Evangeline nearly did not hear it. When you are gone, I was relieved because Victoria was finally calm and the house was finally calm, and I told myself that you had chosen to go somewhere better. I told myself you were well somewhere. A pause. I knew that was not true. I knew, and I chose to keep not knowing. Evangeline looked at her for a moment. There it is, she thought. The truth is always small when it finally comes. It never arrives with drama. It arrives quietly, like a door opening onto an empty room. Thank you, Evangeline said. Her mother looked up. For the truth, Evangeline clarified. It matters. Not enough to change what happens next, but it matters. Her mother stood. She moved toward the door. She paused with her hand on the frame. I am sorry, Evangeline. For whatever it is worth now, I am sorry. Evangeline looked back at the document on her desk. I know, she said. She did not say it was enough. Because it was not. Because apologies are not structures, they cannot hold the weight of what was built on top of them. But she filed it in the same careful place where she filed everything. Truth received, acknowledged, acted upon where possible. She picked up her pen and went back to work. She brought him into the east sitting room of Blackwood Manor on a Thursday evening, 3 weeks after their conversation in the corridor. She had chosen the room because it had 2 exits and enough space between the chairs that they could speak without the proximity becoming a problem for either of them. She was still being careful about proximity. She was being very careful about a great many things. Alistair arrived exactly on time, which she had expected. He sat in the chair across from her and looked at the leather folio she had placed on the table between them. That is not the solicitor's document, he said. No, she agreed. That is something else. She opened it and began to explain, with the same quiet, methodical precision she used for everything, now starting with the broad structure of the network, then narrowing to the specific connections, the names, the documented transactions, the flow of money from the names of aristocrats in good standing to the operations of the Hollow. She watched his face as she spoke. She had become skilled at reading the specific calibrations of controlled anger, the way it went still first, then very focused, as the mind processed what the body already understood. He was still alive, very focused. She placed the key document on the table. It was a payment record bearing 12 signatures, including men who sat in Parliament, who presided over courts, who managed orphanages and charity boards as their public faces, while their private ones funded this. These men will not allow this to become public quietly, Alistair said. No, she agreed. They will not. They will attempt to discredit you first. Then, if that fails, they will attempt something less legal, she finished. Yes, I have been expecting that for some time. My people have flagged at least 2 communications in the past week, suggesting they are already moving. He was quiet for a moment. How many people do you have? Enough, she said. Then, because she had made herself a promise to be honest with him if she was going to be honest with anyone, 31 in active roles, 14 in monitoring positions. Edmund, the man who helped me contact the outside world, coordinates the field side. He is very good. Alistair looked at her for a long moment. When I was searching for you, he said slowly, I imagined finding you. I imagined. He paused. I did not imagine this. What did you imagine? Someone who needed rescuing, he said. There was no embarrassment in it, just honesty. Someone who had survived, but was still marked by it in ways that would take time and care. I am still marked by it, she said. Time and care are ongoing processes. I know, he said. I see that. What I mean is, I did not imagine someone who had also built an army. She almost smiled. It surprised her, not the smile, but the almost of it, the way her face had moved towards something warm, without her consciously directing it. It is not an army, she said. It is a network. There is a difference. The difference being, an army destroys things, she said. A network rebuilds them. Differently, but better. He looked at her with an expression she could not entirely categorize. It was not admiration. Exactly, it was something quieter and more personal than admiration. The look of a man who has been searching for something for a very long time and is only now beginning to understand the shape of what he found. The Winter Gala, she said, steering them back. Victoria will move at the gala. It is the last large gathering before the quarter's end, and she knows that once the financial documents go through the court, Her options narrow to nothing. She will attempt to make a public statement about my credibility and my sanity. Specifically, given that she fabricated a story about my instability for 5 years. And you intend to let her? I intend to let her begin, Evangeline said. Yes. He was quiet for a moment, and then he nodded a single, decisive motion. Then I will be there, he said, with my sons. As your witness, if you will allow it. She looked at him. And if I ask you to stay back, she said, to not intervene until I give you a signal, then I will stay back, he said. I trust you. 3 words. She folded them away carefully, the way she folded away all the things she needed to protect. Good, she said. She closed the folio. Oliver's horse, she said, after a moment. Will you tell him I would like to see it, when this is done? The expression on his face was not something she could name, but it was the warmest thing she had seen in 5 years. He will not let go of it until you do, Alistair said. The Winter Gala at Ashby Hall was the most anticipated social event of the season, which was exactly why Evangeline had allowed it to proceed. Society came to see itself in mirrors, and tonight she intended to show them what they actually looked like. The hall was magnificent. She had to give Victoria that, whatever her sister's failures of character, her ability to produce beauty from borrowed resources was formidable. Candles in the chandeliers, hothouse flowers banked along every wall, the string quartet positioned at the far end of the ballroom, the floor polished to a high shine. The guests arrived in the best of their winter gowns and tallest of their titles, and the air was warm and smelled of mulled wine and expensive perfume. Evangeline wore sapphire blue, the same shade as the day she returned. She would always wear this shade on the days that mattered. She moved through the room with her small glass of champagne and spoke to people she had not spoken to in 5 years, former acquaintances, former friends, people who had accepted Victoria's version of events because it was easier than questioning it. She was not cold to them. She was not warm either. She was simply precise, which was more unsettling to most of them than either extreme. Alistair arrived at 8:15 with his 3 sons, in formal evening attire, the youngest clutching a small carved horse at his side. Oliver caught her eye from across the room and held the horse up very slightly, the way children do when they have been waiting to show someone something important. She gave him the smallest nod. His face broke into a wide, crooked smile. Hold that, she thought. Keep that very close. Whatever happens in the next hour, keep that close. Victoria moved at 9:30. It began as a speech framed as an announcement, delivered from the raised platform at the north end of the ballroom, where such announcements were traditionally made. She stepped up, with the confidence of someone who has been preparing for this moment, and considers themselves adequately armed. Friends, Victoria said, projecting across the room with perfect pitch and a smile of immense performative warmth. I am grateful to have you all here tonight. There is something I must address, as your host and as a member of this family, something that has troubled me deeply since a certain person reappeared in our lives and began making extraordinary claims. The room settled into the specific, electric quiet of people who expect they are about to hear something scandalous. My sister left this house 5 years ago, of her own choice, Victoria continued, smooth and practiced. She was, at the time, in a state of severe mental and emotional distress that led her to make a number of troubling decisions, and that I, out of love for her, chose to protect her from public scrutiny by attributing her disappearance to, "You sold me," Evangeline said. She said it from the center of the room, in a voice pitched to carry, and the entire ballroom went silent. Victoria's composure held for exactly 2 seconds. The distress she referenced, Evangeline continued, moving toward the platform with the steady, deliberate pace of someone who has spent years deciding exactly how this moment would go, led me to a place called the Hollow. I was taken there by men hired and paid by the woman standing on that platform, who signed a bill of sale for my removal, and who then spent 5 years building a life on the assumption that I would not survive long enough to return. She reached into the folio that her agent standing precisely positioned near the platform for exactly this reason placed in her hands. She held the document up. Original. Ink on paper. Victoria's own seal pressed into the corner. "This is the bill of sale," she said. Victoria Ashby's signature and seal. The amount paid, the name of the man who received payment, the date, all of it original, all of it witnessed, and all of it already submitted to the relevant courts in triplicate as of this morning. The room did not move. Victoria stepped down from the platform. Her face was very white. She crossed the floor toward Evangeline with a specific kind of fury, the fury of someone who sees every exit closing simultaneously. "You cannot do this," she said. Her voice had lost its performance. "In front of all these people," "in front of all these people," Evangeline agreed, "is precisely the point. You told your story in front of all these people. I am telling mine in the same room. The difference is that mine has evidence." There were two men near the solicitor's agents, not police, but armed with the appropriate court documents, who moved when Evangeline looked briefly in their direction. Victoria turned when she heard their footsteps. "You have already lost the estate," Evangeline said quietly, while Victoria was still looking at the approaching agents. "The townhouse was transferred to my name by court order last week. The wool contracts are voided. The line of credit is called." Victoria turned back to her. Her expression was something Evangeline had not seen from her before. Not fury, not performance, not calculation. Just the face of a person arriving at the end of a road they built themselves and finding it leads off a cliff. "Everything you built with what you took from me," Evangeline said, very softly now, "I have taken back. That is not cruelty. That is accounting." The agents reached Victoria. The court documents were presented. Victoria looked at them, at the room, at Evangeline, and then in what would later be described by more than 30 witnesses, in more than 30 slightly different ways, Victoria Ashby's composure, finally, completely, and permanently, gave way. She sat down on the ballroom floor in her finest cream gown, and she wept. The room was very quiet. Alistair crossed from the far side of the room and stood beside Evangeline. He did not touch her. He understood, without being told, that she did not want to be touched at this moment, not in front of all these eyes. But he stood beside her in a way that said, without any ambiguity, exactly which side of this room he was on. Oliver had pressed forward through the crowd. He was standing 3 feet away, still holding Captain the carved horse, watching everything with serious, wide eyes. He held the horse out toward her. Evangeline looked down at him. Then she crouched to his level, the same motion she had made in the garden all those years ago, the same lowering of herself to meet someone where they were. "Thank you," she said, "for keeping him safe." "He was waiting for you," Oliver said seriously. She closed her fingers gently around the small carved horse. "So was I," she thought. "I was waiting for all of you too." Subscribe to see how this unfolds and comment below to let me know where you are watching from. I would love to say hello to you and know just how far our story is reaching. The trial, if it could be called that in its entirety, given how much of it was conducted through the civil courts and how much of it was simply a matter of paper meeting paper and evidence meeting evidence, lasted 3 weeks. Victoria was formally charged. The men whose names appeared in the Hollows ledgers were charged alongside her, one by one, as each document was entered and each witness came forward. Edmund testified. So did Agnes. So did 14 of the women who had survived the Hollow and were willing to speak, and whose testimonies, given simply and directly and without embellishment, were more devastating than any amount of legal argument. Evangeline did not testify. She had no need to. She had spent 5 years building a case so complete that her own voice was not required. The documents spoke. The evidence spoke. The truth, once it was given the correct tools, was more than capable of speaking for itself. Lady Cordelia was not charged. There was not sufficient evidence for a criminal charge. What she had done was a moral failure, rather than a legal one, and Evangeline was not interested in prosecuting grief. Her mother was required, however, to formally acknowledge in a signed statement the truth of events as they had occurred. She did so. She wept when she signed it. Evangeline was not present. The Ashby name, as a social entity, did not survive the trial. This was neither surprising nor, Evangeline found, particularly sad. Names are not people. Structures are not life. The name Ashby had been built on her father's work, and her mother's social ambition, and her sister's malice, and the version of it that remained stripped of pretense, stripped of stolen resources, was so diminished that it scarcely needed to be dismantled. It simply faded. Victoria was sentenced. The details are her own to carry. On the 1st of February, exactly 5 years and 11 days from the night she had been taken, Evangeline stood in the small rear courtyard of the building that had once been the Hollow and burned the last of the ledgers. Not all of them the court copies, the evidence copies. Those remained where they were needed. But the originals, the ones she had kept close throughout the 5 years, through the careful underground movement that had led her back to herself, those she burned. Agnes stood beside her and watched the pages catch. "How does it feel?" Agnes asked. "Strange," Evangeline said. "I thought it would feel larger." "It will feel larger tomorrow," Agnes said. "And larger the day after that. That's how freedom works. It takes time to understand the size of the room." Evangeline looked at her. "What will you do now?" she asked. "I have been offered a position managing the accounts for a charitable housing initiative," Agnes said, with the faintest trace of something satisfied. "Someone seems to have established a fund for women leaving difficult circumstances. The paperwork arrived through a law firm I had never heard of. That is very fortunate," Evangeline said. "It is," Agnes agreed, in the tone of a woman who knows exactly when she is being thanked and accepts it with dignity. 2 weeks later, Evangeline went to Blackwood Manor in the late afternoon, when the winter light was low and gold, and the courtyard was full of the noise that 3 active boys produce when left to their own devices. Alistair found her in the front hall, where she had been waiting for approximately 4 minutes. She had timed it, out of old habit. "You came," he said. "I said I would," she said, when it was finished. "Is it finished?" She considered the question seriously, the way she considered all serious questions. "The accounting part is finished," she said. "The rest is still being determined." "The rest," he repeated. "Who I am now," she said. "What I want. How large the room feels when I stop keeping myself small enough to fit inside a 5-year plan." He was quiet for a moment. Then he took 1 step toward her, measured, deliberate, asking without asking. She did not step back. "I asked you, once, to ask me again when it was finished," she said. "I remember," he said. "Then ask," she said. He looked at her for a long, steady moment. In the courtyard beyond the window, one of the boys shouted something about Captain being rescued from a tree, and the other 2 responded in the overlapping, chaotic way of brothers. "Evangeline Ashby," Alistair said, quietly, and with the particular gravity of a man who has been rehearsing a question for 5 years and is finally certain of both the timing and the answer. "Would you begin again with me?" She thought about the stone floor of the Hollow and the smell of cold and chain. She thought about the first morning she managed the books and the slow, cold dawn of understanding that she was going to survive. She thought about Agnes and Edmund and Oliver holding out a small carved horse in a crowded ballroom. She thought about her mother's small, broken apology and the face of a woman arriving at the end of a road built on lies. She thought about what she had told Agnes. It cannot only be destruction. You have to build something too. "Yes," she said. It was a small word, the smallest possible word for the largest possible answer. He reached for her hand. She let him take it. His fingers were warm and steady, and she had to breathe deliberately for 1 careful moment to manage the fact that something she had quietly given up on, not dramatically, not all at once, but in the small incremental way that hope erodes when it goes unfed, was being returned to her. In the courtyard, someone had apparently retrieved Captain from wherever he had been tree-stranded, because the noise shifted into the triumphant register. A moment later, small feet on stone announced that Oliver had found the hallway. He skidded to a stop when he saw them. His eyes went to their joined hands, then to Evangeline's face, then back to their hands. "Are you staying?" he asked directly. with the clarity of a child who has decided that adults waste far too much time approaching the actual question. Evangeline looked at him, then at Alistair, then back at the boy. "Yes," she said. "I am staying." Oliver nodded, as though this had been the only acceptable answer, which, she supposed, it had. He held up Captain. "You can keep him," he said. "I think he already belongs to you anyway." She took the small carved horse with her free hand. She held it carefully. Perhaps that is what the other side of a disaster looks like, she thought. Not a grand arrival, not a moment of triumph large enough to match the scale of the loss, just warmth, and a small wooden horse, and a boy who had decided, entirely on his own, that the answer had always been yes. She held both of them, the horse and the hand, and she let the room feel exactly as large as it was. Betrayal does not have the last word. It has a voice, sometimes a very loud one, sometimes one that costs you years and peace, and things you cannot get back exactly as they were. But it does not have the last word. The last word belongs to the person who decides to survive it, to carry what they learned, without letting it become everything they are, and to build something beyond the wreckage. Evangeline did not leave the hollow, as someone purely defined by what was done to her. She left carrying what she had built inside it: discipline, precision, empathy for the overlooked, and the understanding that accountability, real accountability, not performance, is what justice actually looks like. She also left carrying something harder to name: the knowledge that people who love you owe you their honesty, even when honesty is inconvenient. That silence in the face of harm is its own kind of harm, and that the families we choose, the ones we build with care, with effort, with genuine attention to who people actually are, can carry more warmth than the families we were given, if we are brave enough to build them. The moral is not simply that revenge is sweet, or that the wicked are punished. Life is not always that clean. The moral is that survival is not the end of the story. What you do after, how you rebuild, who you choose to become, whether you let the worst thing that happened to you define the full shape of your character, that is where the real story lives. Evangeline chose to build. That is the part worth keeping. Subscribe to see how this unfolds and comment below to let me know where you are watching from. I would love to say hello to you and know just how far our story is reaching.